This is the Real Estate Investing 365 podcast, your go-to source for real estate investing strategies so you can start living the life you want and get where you want to go. With your host, Justin Hanna.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Another episode of Real Estate Investing 365. Today, I got with me Ashley Wilson. She's from the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She has several companies. One of them is How's It Look and Bar Down Investments. She also has Ace High Partners. How's It Look specializes in flipping houses, and Bar Down Investments operates apartments throughout the country. She's been a part of over $40 million in real estate transactions, maybe more at this point, I'm not sure, and overseen like $5 million or more in construction. So Ashley, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So how's everything going today? You mentioned that the weather's been actually pretty nice out there, but coronavirus is taking a toll on everybody, I guess.
Absolutely. It's definitely a game changer for a lot of people. For us, we are both my husband and I, we work together on all of our businesses. We work from home. So it's been a little bit of a change balancing having the kids home while we're working. But other than that, obviously some changes within the individual businesses. But in terms of our work life, it's a little bit different, but a little bit the same as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Ashley and I were talking before we started recording just about our kids and being home, and it's like, it takes a toll on their business because her and her husband both run businesses, and they're both home. And then like me and my wife, we have the stuff that I do and the stuff that she does. And I just can't imagine if you were a single parent or something, it's like, where do you send your kids all day? It's just a struggle for sure. And we'll probably touch on that more about the business aspect later on. But before we'll get started, by kind of how did you get started in real estate? Like, how did it come about? Like, what did you do before real estate? The whole kind of intro to your real estate career.
Well, it's actually pretty interesting what I did before, especially given today's situation with the coronavirus. I actually worked for pharmaceutical companies previously in clinical research and development, specifically the last 5 years of working in pharma prior to leaving to work full-time in real estate. I worked within the vaccine division of GlaxoSmithKline. I actually worked during the H1N1 pandemic, and I was considered critical personnel by the World Health Organization because we were one of two companies that was manufacturing a vaccine at that time for H1N1. I'm very well versed in what's going on right now. I think at a higher level than, obviously at a higher level than the general public. So that has been really advantageous in the decisions that I'm making with respect to my businesses and how I'm setting them up. I understand disease progression. I understand compassionate use trials. I understand what the timeline looks like and where I think that is going to coincide with the overall economy and the real estate world specifically. I'm not pretending to be someone who has a glass ball that you can, take whatever I'm going to say to the bank. But I think I definitely have more insight than most people do on this topic, especially within the real estate world. So that's what I was. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to let you keep going, but I want to touch on the business side of that later. But since we're talking about that, so what do you kind of think with the whole, like the progression of the virus as far as the vaccine? Is it as big a deal as the media is making it out to be, or is it kind of less? What are your thoughts on that?
I think right now there are a lot of policies across the majority of the country with a stay-at-home or sheltered home, whatever the terminology is within your respective state. And I think that a lot of people are misunderstanding the intention for why this is happening. Most people only see the intention for this directive because it limits the stress we put on our healthcare workers, the healthcare organization, hospitals, the supplies that are needed to combat COVID-19. However, there's another reason why this is going on as well, and it's to buy us time to either develop antibodies, vaccines, and or medication. All of those things take time. And a lot of people don't realize, and a lot of people are very frustrated at why we do not have the medication, the vaccines, and the antibodies already identified at this point. And the reason is because there are hundreds of combinations of different virus strains. And every year, and I know this because I did at one point work with the WHO in identifying what seasonal and pandemic flus were on the horizon. And what happens in that situation is pharmaceutical companies work with the WHO to identify what potential virus strains are going to come next, and they have to initiate clinical trials very quickly in order to have product available for the next season of the flu, if you're talking about seasonal flu. With pandemic, there's a lot of different variations, and we're still in the process of doing all of those clinical trials. In addition, if you look at different vaccines, we went from monovalent, which means single strain, to quadrivalent, which means 4 strains within one single vaccine. All of those different combinations, when you mix them together, they actually react differently. So just because a monovalent vaccine works, if you take the same viral load in that vaccine and combine it with 3 other monovalents that have proven efficacy, when they combine, what happens is that some virus strains become less effective, or they become more effective and they give too much of the virus. So there's obviously a science behind combining these strains. So what we're doing right now is buying ourselves time in order to identify these vaccines we can use to combat, the medication we can use, and we can't just give medication or vaccine without proven success, but from both a safety and efficacy standpoint. And there are different levels of trials and that process that you have to go through. So that's one of the reasons that the stay at home is being implemented. I don't think a lot of people realize that. I know it's going to take a lot of time, and it's combating it from a lot of different perspectives. I think that obviously we're getting hit on the economy, and there is a risk that the economy collapse will kill more people than COVID-19. That's a risk we are taking. But honestly, that's not my decision to make. I just understand the rationale behind what we're doing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the most recent Bigger Pockets podcast touched on it well, about the reasoning. And then also, I think Joe Rogan had a podcast that came out that had like I don't know if he's a CDC guy or World Health guy on there. Anyways, it was kind of explaining the whole thing. But no, I definitely understand why they're doing it. I think the majority of people, though, they don't really look into it that much. They just think, oh, we have to stay at home, and it's like because it's going to kill us all. Or they just think, oh, the government's overreacting. But yeah, it's like when they talk about flattening the curve, it's definitely that, to like prolong the thing so they have more time to, like you said, don't overwhelm the medical community, and then also time for a vaccine. So you think that, how long do you think it'll last? I mean, it's probably hard to say, but
it's hard to say, because one of the things that people don't take into consideration is compliance of a country. So we look at China, and we're modeling a lot of things off of China, but I would guess that the Chinese population has a higher compliance to government directive than the US, just based off of, I think common sense. So I read an article actually this morning that was talking, it was very, very interesting article in the LA Times. And unfortunately, I can't remember the gentleman who authored the article, but it was talking about someone who, I believe they were a Nobel Peace Award recipient, who looked at the rate of progression of the disease. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I kept looking at when I look at the data, because I look at it at least 5 times a day, is that I didn't understand the numbers. And it's only after reading his article that it made sense to me. I couldn't conceptualize the numbers that they were forecasting with the actual data that I was seeing. And neither can this person who wrote this article for the LA Times, or the gentleman that they were interviewing. What they said in the article is that the rate of progression is actually decreasing. So if you look at, for example, a ball that is rolling down the hill, while it is getting faster, the acceleration rate, if you look at it at intervals, is actually getting slower. And that's something that I kept looking at the data and it wasn't making sense to me. But once they said, look at the rate of progression of the infection rate, it's actually slowing down, even though it's gaining
Numbers.
speed. It's not gaining speed at the level that it was previously. So if you look at it from an exponential factor and you use that data to analyze across other countries, which is definitely a more, I think it's a better way to analyze the situation. I think that it's very clear that we're a little bit further along than what people are saying that we're at. Most people are saying we're, just at the beginning, but this person was saying, no, we're closer to the middle, because if you look at, the rate at which it's progressing, it's actually slowing down. And one of the things that they used in comparison was Italy. The reason why Italy is having such a challenge in terms of their population, and I think everyone knows, if you've listened to the news and they talk about Italy, is that Italy has the oldest population in all of Europe. However, one thing that hasn't been said, and it's actually the only time I've ever seen it mentioned, is Italy's population is very anti-vaxxer type mindset. And because of that, they don't have antibody buildup and immune system. They don't have the same immune system that the rest of Europe has. So whether or not it's the same antibodies that are built up, their immune system and the way that their immune system, is operating, I mean, some may argue that it is at a deficit as compared to other countries that have buildup of antibodies in their system already due to previous vaccinations.
Okay.
So I'm not trying to say that a previous vaccination will combat COVID-19. I just want to be very clear on that. But what I'm saying is that the body's ability to fight disease progression is based off of a healthy body. That's why people always refer to, pre-existing conditions. And people typically have complications when they have pre-existing conditions. A healthier body is going to have the immune response that you need. And when you trigger your immune response, it's kind of similar to a muscle where you're constantly building strength by doing that. So it was a very interesting article from a very different perspective. And it's the first time I heard about the anti-vax argument for Italy. So I think there are a few hugely relevant points in that article.
Yeah. No, that's a lot of good information. I wonder if they do come out with a vaccine, how many, people that are like anti-vaccinations will get the vaccine. You know what I mean? Like, or what their thoughts on that. I do know. I mean, I don't want to take away from, some cases that, like, I have one of my best friends actually lost a child, and it was directly due to the vaccine, but it was genetic mutation in the child when it was born. You know what I mean? And they didn't know about it before it got the vaccine, but that's like a 1 in, 20 million case or something ridiculous, of that. So I don't want to take away that it is serious sometimes, but for the most part, vaccines have done a great thing for our world, humanity, and overall, tremendous life savings event. So I wonder how many people will actually get it if once it comes out, hopefully. But yeah, no, that's good insight. That's so interesting. I didn't know anything about your past in the pharmaceutical industry or anything like that. I don't know if anybody did, because I don't know if you mentioned on Bigger Pockets or anything like that. So it's cool.
I normally just reference that, my husband and I had 2 very well-paying jobs, which is true. It's, I was in clinical R&D. Most people meet me and they think, oh, she, is a young blonde woman, and it's very stereotypical, but honestly, that's what people think that is someone who gets recruited to sales. So they ultimately assume that I was in sales, and no, I was in clinical research and development. I worked on clinical trials prior to FDA EMA global trials, whatever the regulatory body that governs that specific region, for approval. So for example, I was in India working on chickenpox vaccine, and it's because of the work of the trial that I led that got to approval that saved millions of children's lives due to the chickenpox vaccine that we were able to get approved in the country. So, there's a lot of good work that's being done. And I know it takes a lot of time, but that is to protect the entire world. One of the things that's very interesting is that, and I found this to be shocking, but you cannot take data from Europe after a clinical trial and apply it to the US. So we still have to run our own trials, and that's because people in different regions act differently. People, different genders, different ages, different heritage. There's so many different nuances. So, the work that's being done right now by not only the people in the hospital tending to all these patients that have coronavirus, but also, the people in the bricks and mortar large pharmaceutical companies are also heroes as well, because they're risking their lives going out every single day, potentially being infected just like the people in the hospital. But they're working tirelessly as well. 7 days a week, double shifts, from paper pushers to people in labs to people running clinical trials. There's a lot of unsung heroes in this battle.
Yeah, for sure. I think most of America too is kind of short-sighted in the fact, they kind of, everybody thinks like they don't really look at the big picture, whether they're thinking about politics or like what the government's actions, or in this case, like disease prevention. They don't think about all the different things that have to go in place to run a country of 350 million people. And just like, it's massive. It's so beyond what we really know is going on. You know more than the most, but for the most part, even with the government, like we don't really know all the stuff and all the steps that they're doing behind the scenes. So we just like to pick on them and talk crap all the time. So, but anyways, I'm sure we could spend all day on this because it's super interesting, but let's go back to,
Sorry.
you worked for the pharmaceutical industry, and your husband was, I think, a pro hockey player, right?
Correct. Yep. So he played for 11 years. Over that time, we moved almost 40 times in 11 years. So wow. He played all over the US, and then we moved over to Europe for 4 years. But ultimately, getting back to the original question of how did we get started in real estate, because both of us were doing really well in our jobs very early on, specifically, my husband's career was not a career that he knew, was a life career. He knew that he would make a lot of money very early on in his life, but that would not be sustained. So he was the one who actually started doing research on how we could invest our money to build wealth, not get rich, but build wealth. That was the whole idea behind it. And he found Bigger Pockets, I think maybe a year or 2 years. I don't know when Bigger Pockets came out, but I think it was maybe a year or 2 years after Bigger Pockets came out. Mm-hmm. And we just absorbed it like a sponge. And we bought into, the rich dad, poor dad philosophy, Bigger Pockets. We saw it as a tool that we could use to help us gain knowledge and propel us forward in investing in real estate. So we purchased our first rental property. It was short-term rental. Now most people call them Airbnb rentals. We bought that in 2010, so 10 years ago, in the spring of 2010. And that was the start, and we haven't looked back.
That's cool. No, that's awesome. So one thing I do want to highlight there is, okay, so some people listening will be like, well, they both had great incomes. He's a professional hockey player. She's in the pharmaceutical, but it's all by perspective what you guys have, right? Because I tell people this all the time, like my wife and I are decently well off. I have a good living here, but there's people out there that make 10 times as much as we are, and they're not doing what we're doing in real estate. And then there's people that are making a tenth of what we're making, and they're doing more than I'm doing in real estate. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, it does help to have like a bigger income, but just because you have a bigger income, you probably have higher bills, all your overall expenses go up or whatever. And you might not have the knowledge. Just because you're making a ton of money is not an easy pass just to automatically get into real estate investing or be successful at it. You know what I mean? And another thing, your husband being a pro hockey player, what do they say? Like 80% of retired NFL players end up not having all that money after 5 years or something like that. Like it quickly goes away because you're focused on being a athlete. You're not focused on like business minded or like growing that wealth. They probably don't talk too much about that. I would imagine. So what's your thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more, to be honest with you. I do a lot of speaking engagements, and one of the first things I say on every single presentation is, if you tune out now because you think we started with a lot of money, you're going to miss out on a lot of good information that's going to help you no matter what your financial situation is. At the end of the day, everyone has advantages and disadvantages to help them be successful in life. One thing that I am really not good at, and still to this day I'm not good at, is marketing myself and raising capital. So, you say, for example, well, that makes sense because like her greatest strength is her greatest weakness. So I had capital to begin with. So I never developed that skill of how to raise money. And now I'm in the apartment industry where I'm syndicating deals and I'm relying on another team member to raise capital because that's not my genius. And I think that everyone has something to add to make them very successful. And if you look at what other people have and say that you don't have what other people have, you're missing the opportunity to look internally to figure out what your benefit and what your advantage is to real estate. So yes, do we have capital to invest in when we first got started? Absolutely. I've never denied that. But when you look at my ability to scale and the problems I had down the road, they all catch up to you at some point. You really need to focus on the thing that you have and use that to your advantage by partnering with other people who have what you don't have to get there. And to be honest with you, if I had partnered with more people earlier on, I would be a lot further along than where I am today. It's because I had the means to do it on my own that I didn't grow as fast as I did. Right. People who start off with less actually get further faster because they realize they need to partner with people sooner. And right. I didn't come to that realization until years later. So I really think, going off of what we were just talking about, having this short-sighted mindset, I think people who do really well are people who have a long-term mindset and then take the necessary short-term steps to get there.
Right.
So.
No, like that saying goes, good is the biggest enemy of great. That's totally the case. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Especially, yep. I mean, like I make a decent amount of money, or I have a friend that he makes a lot of money and his wife is in pharmaceutical sales. She's like a director of like the West Coast for this pharma company. So she makes a ton of money. Well, they're like not very motivated to do anything extra, right? Yep. They're making, $800,000-900,000 a year or whatever it is. And they're just like in a small town. They have no bills really, so it's hard for them to like progress. Whereas somebody that's like coming from above, they're hungry. They're like, want to go out there and really learn and push it. And so eventually it might take them 10 or 20 years, but eventually they could be making, $5 million a year. And the other people are still stuck down here at less, whatever, which is still a lot of money. I'm not saying it's not, but I get what you're saying for sure. So yeah, I don't want anybody to listen and hear that because everybody has their own struggles and it always annoys me. I think the reason I brought that up is because I was looking at your Bigger Pockets comments on your episode and some guy was on there and he said, oh, as soon as I heard that her husband was a pro hockey player, I turned it off. He's like had that on a comment. And I was like, I like almost got so irritated. I almost wanted to message him on Bigger Pockets and say, bro, you're in Kentucky and you say you have $50,000 to get started. Like, houses in Kentucky are only $50,000. Like you could buy probably 10 houses right now with that $50,000 and be doing great. So, anyways, I digressed on that. So you guys bought your first property. It was like an Airbnb in 2010, kind of before Airbnb really took off. Where was that property? Did you mention, was it in Philadelphia area?
That was actually in a Hershey. My husband was playing for the Hershey Bears at the time. So we purchased the property as kind of a hybrid. So what we did is we house hacked it during the season while he was there playing, which, by the way, we house hacked today. We have house hacked our entire relationship. That's an aside. But we would house hack during the season, which means that we would rent out the other rooms to other teammates of his. And then in the summer, we would rent it as an Airbnb. So we did that. He was only there for the first year we owned it. And then the years after that, we just rented it to guys on the team because obviously we knew, the whole team pretty much after the year he left. So we would rent it to other guys during the season. And then we would do Airbnb every summer.
Okay, cool. Perfect. So you got that first house in 2010. Now, did you continue to buy more property? Let's kind of walk through the progression of what the next couple steps were in that process.
So after we had that property for 3 years, we turned it into a long-term rental. The reason being for that was just because we were in a different stage of our life. And even though it can be very hands-off, there's just a lot of little nuances when you convert it over to an Airbnb. We would have to drive up and stock everything. And then we had everything automated. But in terms of like the initial onset, we just didn't want to be so heavily involved in it. So we turned it into a long-term rental. And the person who rented it from us after a few months wanted to buy it from us. So we eventually sold it to that person. And then we bought another property that we did the same thing where we house hacked it. But because he was playing in all different cities, we would be living for 9 months out of the year somewhere else. And then on the properties we would buy, we would only be living in a room in that property for 3 months of the year. And then, someone else could live in the rest of the house and basically have a whole house to themselves. So it worked. I think it worked out for everyone because we had someone checking on the house for us, someone living in the other side of the house. And so we did that. And then my husband finished his career in the US and moved to Europe. And at the same time, that's when I got out of pharma. And I approached my husband because we knew we always wanted to get into real estate full-time after his career. But we were putting that on hold because we just thought it would be better to do that after his career as opposed to while his career was going on. If you know me at all, I cannot sit still. I need to constantly educate myself. I need to constantly be doing things. And I approached him and I said, why are we not doing this while you're still working? Because this way we can work out all the mistakes. We're going to have, there's going to be a learning curve. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to lose money. Why don't we do this while you have your income to support whatever mistake we make? And he thought that was a really good idea. My dad is a general contractor and he was getting to an age where he should not be doing work physically anymore. So he was the perfect partner to have. He had a company for over 40 years, a general contracting business. So he knows how to do everything. So he was the perfect partner that we could trust, that we knew was knowledgeable, that had, that would be committed, that our values aligned. It was just a natural partner. It was a natural fit. So he served as boots on the ground for us while I was in Europe, and I would do literally everything soup to nuts in flipping. So I would do the design, I would find the houses, I would analyze the properties, I would order the materials. Short of physically being at the property, I did everything. And then when I would come home, I physically worked on the property with my dad. So we did that. And that business we still have. It's will be 6 years in October.
Okay. So you started that kind of around 2014.
Correct.
And so, let's talk about that a little bit because you were so far away. You had your dad there to do the construction part of it, but how were you finding the deals Was it just off the MLS, or were you guys doing direct marketing? How did that work out?
It's funny because everyone tells me, I still go to meetups today and people say, you cannot find deals off the MLS. And I just sit there quietly because I would say, I think we're around 80% of the properties we've done have been off of MLS. So I think that there are other flaws in the system than just saying that you can't find properties off of MLS. One of which is maybe your cost of construction is too high. You might be analyzing things incorrectly in terms of, your ARV. You might not be throwing out enough offers. I know what my yield is, so I know how many offers I need to make to yield a property. Maybe you aren't tracking that. Maybe you aren't going after the right type of houses. Maybe you don't know how to look off of MLS. But there's a lot of different ways than just saying a blanket. I mean, to me, that's like a quitter's mindset, a quitter's attitude.
Yeah.
So, are there fewer properties on MLS than there were after 2008? Yes, I don't think anyone would disagree with that, but are there deals still on MLS today? Yes, we just bought one not too long ago in November. So I think that we take a different approach to using the MLS, and that's why we've been so successful at finding them off of the MLS.
Okay, cool. So what kind of was that thing? You guys were buying in Philadelphia for this business, right?
Correct.
Okay. So what was kind of the stuff that you were looking for an MLS deal that, most other investors would pass up on?
Absolutely. So what we realized is, well, first of all, let me take a step back and say we got the first property we offered on. A lot of people hear that and they're like, well, you could never do that in my market. You can't do that in this market either. But this is the difference. We analyzed hundreds of properties before we made an offer. I don't think that's the right approach. I think we would have gotten a property sooner, but we would have had a lot of no's before yes if we had made an offer on every property we analyzed. The difference here is we did a lot of analysis on different properties to work out the kinks and learn the process and everything, but we only pulled the trigger once and got the first house, and we thought it was going to be easy. We were like, wow, this is really easy. And we didn't understand why we got that property at the time. It looked like a flip. It had all the characteristics of a flip. It was ugly. It needed a ton of work, but we didn't understand why we got that property. It wasn't until later that we realized why we got that property. So fast forward, and I'll circle back to why we got that property, but fast forward, we were offering on properties and we couldn't find a property. And then finally we got a property, and it was really out of our farm area, so to speak. So we got that property and we thought, okay, great. Maybe it's good again. Once again, that property was on MLS. Both these properties were off of MLS. And what we started to realize is that there's a certain price point in which there's a lot of competition in every single market. When you get out of that price point, the competition decreases significantly. That's one thing we did. We focused on houses that were in a different price point, a higher price point. The second thing we did is we focused on houses that were full gut renovations. Most people were looking for, mid-level renovations. We put in all new mechanicals. We do all new plumbing, all new HVAC, all new electrical. We're dealing with older homes, early 1900s homes, which was another characteristic of a house that makes us more advantageous. We would literally soup to nuts on that house. Yes, that's a higher renovation cost. It's higher risk, but it also lends to be higher reward. So we positioned ourselves in this niche, and that allowed us to get more properties off of the MLS that other people weren't getting. So, I think that's when you look back to the first house, that house was a full gut rehab, early 1900s home. It was too much for most flippers to tackle. And that's why we were able to get that property without realizing it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, you're absolutely right that every market has their, 80% of the houses are being sold in this like sub, let's say $300,000 range or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And if you look outside that, the pluses to that is that like you guys have realized there's huge profit margins, when you do those kinds of deals. I guess the downside would be that you have a smaller buyer pool. So you have to make sure you're renovating the property in the correct way to like bring in the right type of buyer and make it stand out. So let's talk about that a little bit. How do you know when you go look at a house, it's like, it's an older house, it's a full remodel, full gut. How do you know how to remodel it? Like, what's your style going to be? What are all your appliances, and then the decor that you're going to put in there? Like, how do you know all that information?
I think this is really hard for me. I get this question a lot. I think it's really hard for me to explain how I do it, but I think I can explain how someone else can do it. The way I do it is I grew up with my dad doing everything from Section 8 to multi-million-dollar mansions. And he would literally bring me to the job site when we had a day off of school or, in the summer, because both of my parents worked full time. I think subconsciously I learned the type of people that like certain houses, and I learned their styles. I never went to any sort of interior decorating school or, design school, anything like that. But just being cognizant of my surroundings growing up as a kid when we would go to these different houses, I think really lend itself well, because when I walk into any space now, it could be a restaurant, like my husband and I are going out to dinner, and I can think to myself, oh, they should have done this instead of the way they did this soffit, for example. Like, I just think like that. I don't know why, honestly. And people have said from the very beginning that they were shocked at like how good I am at it, but it's all because of my dad. My dad instilled this in me. He taught it to me. He pointed things out. He took the extra time to really develop that skill that I have. I think other people can learn this by analyzing demographics of a neighborhood. So you look at comparable sales and you look at how long they stayed on the market. Those two things will tell you what you need to know. If the house sold very quickly and it was designed a certain way, that means there's a large buyer pool in that market that likes that style home. We do that for every house that we buy. I know going into a house who the buyer is going to be. And what I do is design for that buyer. A lot of people think that's very risky because you're limiting your buyer pool by having such a tailored design. But for us, because we are not doing the lower price point homes that every flipper is going after, they're trying to capture the masses. We're going after a more tailored buyer who has specific features that they want in a house. And I think by taking that approach then attracts those buyers. So it's a different nuance. I think if we were doing lower price point homes and we were trying to appeal to the masses, we would just have a standard set of finishes that we did to every house that, is the latest and greatest on HGTV that everyone's watching. But the buyers that we're going after most likely are not watching HGTV. They're subscribing to Architectural Digest, for example. It's a total different market. And understanding that, I think, helps you achieve your ARV.
Okay. No, it makes total sense. Yeah. I mean, pretty much it just comes down to doing your research and learning the market. When you're just getting started, you need to just like go out there and, like you said, like see what's selling, like look at the style of the houses, find out the neighborhood, like look at your neighborhood, see what's selling in that neighborhood. I know, like if I'm buying a 8-year-old house up in Boise, then, I know the renovation needs to be a certain way compared to if I'm buying a house here where I live in Northern California. The more rustic and like mountainous type of home is going to be the preferred decor, or what am I trying to say? Style. But if I go down to my sister-in-law's where she lives in Southern California, they're super modern, like square, like that modern architecture and all that stuff. So it's just learning the environment that you're in. So that definitely makes sense. Let's go through maybe one of your more recent deals, like how you found the deal. You have one in mind, maybe we could touch on like how you found the deal, how you financed it, like what the ARV was going to be, what you guys put into it, all that kind of stuff.
So a flip or
let's do
a flip.
Yeah, let's do a flip because, maybe my next question is going to be to touch on if that's really what people should be focusing on right now, like where the economy is and all that type of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's still viable as long as your numbers are, you pad your numbers for the downturn or whatever is coming in the future. You know what I mean?
So I'll talk about the one we have under contract right now.
Okay.
So we found that property off of MLS. And I saw it when it first got put on the market, and I thought, this is an interesting house. It really doesn't need that much. To be honest with you, it's not in our normal, realm in the sense that it was a full gut rehab. It was more like primarily cosmetic. It was a contemporary styled house. And I just thought, there could be a few touches to this and it would really increase the value significantly. And I just put it on a watch. I didn't make an offer. We didn't go see it. I have houses that I watch. And one thing that is a signifier.
You put it on a watch, like on Zillow or a realtor
Mm-hmm.
or something like that?
Correct. Okay. And then I do, weekly reviews of the houses that are on the market. And what I do is I look for how frequent and at what rate do they do price drops. That to me tells me how motivated a buyer is. If someone doesn't do a price drop and their house has been on the market for 180 days, these people aren't motivated to sell. They're going to need some sort of event in their life to be triggered to sell. If I see someone who puts a house on the market in less than a month, they do a price drop, I don't care how significant it is, that's someone who's way more motivated to sell than the person that I just talked about. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things I do. And I think that helps you find deals off the MLS as well, to be honest. Had it on my watch list, kept watching it for a few months. And then finally we were in the position to start looking for houses again. And I said, why don't we go take a look at this house? We went and looked at the house, and they had done a couple price drops at this point. And we ended up purchasing the property. To be honest with you, I can't remember what the property was listed at, but it was in the $3s. And we ended up purchasing it for $295. I think it was like mid $3s, if I remember correctly, around there. And we ended up purchasing it for $295. The ARV that I had on the property started at $485 conservatively, and it could go up to $515. Okay. The financing for it is, we do all of our financing now through a bank. We have a local connection that we utilize, and that has proved to be very advantageous in the rates that we're paying, because at the end of the day, the number one thing you have to know about real estate, investing in real estate, doesn't matter what asset class, is cost of capital. If you can get your cost of capital down, you're golden. That's all you have to do. That is literally the secret to investing in real estate. Doesn't matter. So for us, having this bank connection decreases our cost of capital as opposed to a private money lender or hard money lender, or even our own capital, because I can invest my money for more and get a greater return than what the bank is charging me for in interest, which is a whole other concept. But right. The point is that we financed it through bank financing. Every single property that you ever do will have some weird component to it. And what your job is to distract from the weird and highlight something really cool about the house. So to take people's attention away from the fact that that there's this weird aspect to the house. In this house, for example, it's a very cool contemporary house, and it's actually positioned well because most contemporary houses have one bedroom on the first floor, and then they have all the other bedrooms on another floor, whether it be the basement or the second floor. This house actually has 2 bedrooms on each floor, which I think a lot of people like, and it opens up a larger buying pool to families that have younger kids, because people who have younger kids don't like their kids living on a different floor. We got the property under contract very quickly. But what was crazy was that even though this house is a relatively new house and the septic system should have been fine, and when we purchased it, by the way, we purchased with no contingencies, and we never tested the septic system, but there's no evidence that there was any issues with the septic system. What we found out is when they built the septic system, they didn't pitch the pipe coming out of the house correctly. So it was more flat, as opposed to there's a certain drop that the run must make for the distance of the run to make sure that there's no standing water. And in this house, this was not the case. So we had to replace an entire septic system. And because of that, it fell out of contract. So when all of this was going on, this was during the winter, and it's very hard to replace a septic system with frozen ground in the winter. So, long story short, we're obviously holding the property longer and longer and longer as the septic system got replaced. We recently put the house under contract. Sorry, go ahead.
It fell out of contract before you guys bought it? Is it what you're saying?
No. When we did the renovation, and then the buyer from us.
Oh, okay.
So the buyer who was going to purchase the house from us, they did an inspection and they found that the septic did not pass because of the pitch of the pipe.
Right.
So
okay.
That was the problem. So then it fell out of contract. We had to replace the septic system. And we have it under contract today. It is going to close the middle of April. And I'll just say, because I don't want to say until it closes, I always think that's bad luck, but around the ARV that I had projected. So within that range that I had said. So what's interesting about all of this is that the bank did not issue an appraisal. So the buyer who's purchasing the property, despite it going, despite the fact that we're with COVID-19, people are saying we're in a recession. I personally believe we're in a recession. The bank waived the appraisal on the property. And I think that goes to show that the property is definitely worth what they're purchasing it for. It's a 3,000 square foot house in a very, very nice area. The comps are definitely very supportive of the price that they're getting it for. In fact, they're getting it for a deal in terms of comp prices. But that is, something we're dealing with right now.
Okay, cool. So I've never heard of a bank waiving that. Is it a local bank that's doing the financing?
I have never heard of a bank waiving an appraisal.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I don't understand why they're doing it, but
maybe they're waiving it now
argue.
Because I did hear that a lot of appraisal company, banks are having the appraisals, just exterior appraisals done, and they're not even going inside the houses because of COVID-19, So maybe it's something to do with like the modern, the recent events that have taken place. But it seems crazy that they would do that. Good for the buyers, good for you guys, because maybe that would have messed something up. But okay, so what was the renovation budget on that house?
So the original renovation budget on that house, we had pegged at 90, but then we had to replace the entire septic system. So it's a little over 100, what it finished.
Okay. So do you have any tips for people, like when they're going in and they're doing their, their due diligence about how much their renovation budget is going to be? Like, how do you go in, and I guess your dad and yourself kind of probably go in and go room by room, but what's some tips for somebody that's going to go in and, estimate their rehab costs?
When you first get started, I think it's important to go through room by room. So a lot of people have checklists, and when we first got started, we had a checklist that we went through, and we would write out the size of the room, and it would yield a calculation in terms of the materials needed. That would give us a ballpark number for the renovation budget. Because, my dad's very well versed in this from his own profession. And then from everything that he taught me, we can walk through a house in 5 minutes. I don't use a checklist at all anymore. I literally walk through a house. I walk through with him, but he's he goes through and looks at like every single detail. I can walk through a house in 5 minutes. I can tell you within 5% range of what that renovations budget's going to be. So I'm off about 5%, both sides. I could be off 5% under and I could be off 5% over. But I think I've gotten it down pretty good. And then my dad, so we walk through the house independently, we come out, and then we each say our renovation number. And at the most we're off by is also $5,000. That's it. We're pretty close in terms of what our renovation budgets are. And then what we do to make sure that we're staying on top of material cost, and because, you know, we've had rising material costs in the past 3 years, specifically with lumber and plumbing supplies. So what we do to spot check is, I would say probably once a quarter or so, even though we do it this way, we'll go through a house line item by line item again, just to make sure that we stay on top of the changing prices. But other than that, we just walk through it real quickly and say the number.
Yeah, but for somebody just getting started, you know, you definitely want to do your initial couple houses anyways until you get comfortable with what prices are, and, you know, probably go room by room, like you'd mentioned, you know, make a checklist and say, okay, the kitchen, we're going to do the countertops, we're going to do the appliances and the cabinets, and we're going to refinish the flooring and this, and then break down each one of those costs, and then the living room and bedrooms and all that stuff until you get proficient in it. You know, what we do in Idaho is we go, and so for our initial rough estimates, you know, we have like light rehab, medium rehab, full rehab, and so we have like $1 per square foot. So light's like $10 a square foot.
Correct.
Rehab, $20 a square foot, then $30 a square foot. And then once we get under contract, we go in there and we actually look at it more. Then we kind of get like a more exact detail of what the cost is going to be, and we can either go back to the seller and try to renegotiate, even though we don't really like to do that. But that's kind of how we do it. So yeah, it's kind of the same thing. Now that you guys are pros and you've done it so much, you don't really have to think about it too much. It's easier for sure.
We also do what you said as well. So what we do is we take a look at the house, and per the square footage, they fall into each falls into a different category. And then from there, what we do is we decide, you know, so it's a certain range, size house, full gut rehab, medium, and like a cupcake flip. And then whether or not we're doing a basement. So that also adds some extra cost as well. And because we have, you know, so we have the different metrics, and then we use the different size of the house, then we can analyze what it is price per square foot, what we're doing on totality of the house. So we don't have to then break it down. Now, there are some nuances to that. For example, we're doing a house right now that has 5.5 bathrooms. So that's a little bit different because obviously, you know, the square footage, let's say, for example, the square footage was 3,000 square feet. And our typical 3,000 square foot house only has 2.5 bathrooms. Bathrooms are really expensive. They're going to add an added cost. So just there's little nuances. So sometimes like finding those shortcuts doesn't always work out, but if it falls within your standard house that you do, then it will work.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a ton of sense. So, and also you said you use your local bank. Let's touch on that real quick. So do they finance, you know, the purchase and the rehab costs?
Yes, they do.
Okay. So, and how did you guys end up finding that bank? Was it just purely networking, or how can somebody else go out and do that?
It's networking, and it's not listening to people who tell you that you can't find a bank. So, excuse me. My husband, by the way, was one of those people who told me I wouldn't be able to do it. The standard rule of thumb is that you need to be in business for 2 years or more with 2 years of tax returns, and to go to a local bank to fund your deals. And what they do then is they take your tax returns and they look at the profits that you've made over the 2 years, and they average those returns, and they decide based on an average return, a percentage of the profit that you've made to fund your property. That's the general rule of thumb. And when I learned this, I said, there's no way. that, you know, the whole benefit of going to a local bank is because it's a relationship based. There's no way that that's the only way that this can happen. And my husband was one of those people who said, nope, we need 2 years of tax returns. Well, 1 year into the business, before I even had my first year of tax returns, I just told everyone that I was looking for a bank to fund my deals. And if anyone knew of such a bank, to let me know. And someone did. In fact, our realtor was the one who introduced me to this bank and said, I know that they fund, you know, my other clients' deals, so maybe they'll fund yours. So I created a packet of every deal we had done to date, which, by the way, was 2. And, you know, we were working on our 3rd, and I created a packet with all of my forecasted numbers and all of my actuals, because I knew that if I'm going to communicate with a bank only cares about numbers. And really that's what I wanted to show them. I wanted to show them that this was a business. It wasn't a hobby. And I was very transparent in every single number. And I explained any number that we were off by. And then I invited this person out to the house that we were doing. I told my father to clear his schedule. We were going to show him the house, walk him through the house. I was going to give him this packet, and then we were going to take him out to lunch. He didn't have time for lunch, but he took the packet with him. And before he left, he said, you know, I think this shows me that you really take this seriously. You know what you're doing. And we would be happy to find your next deal. And they did. And we've been doing deals with them ever since.
That's awesome. No, it totally coincides with, like, you know, what the experience that I've had and what other people have said is, you know, you have to just go out there and try. You have to just like call and call and call and call. You know, I remember one time I had 26 banks on a list, and I just like went through and I just like would call every single one. And then over and over again, I would just call them to see which one's going to have the best financing or work for me the best, you know? So it's just like, and then also, like you said, talking to your realtor or talking to bigger pockets or different people, you don't know, every bank, local bank has different standards. Some of them are the same, but they're often different. So you never know what they'll do for you. So that's awesome. Okay. Yeah, that kind of all makes sense. So real quick, let's touch on your other business, your apartment investing. We won't dive super deep into it, but kind of give us a rundown of how that works. Are you just buying into like syndications, or you're managing the deals, or buying the deals yourself? How does that work?
So originally we started, and the first deal we did, we passively invested. And then the next 2 deals after that, we actively invested. So in other terms, we were a limited partner on the first deal, and on the following 2 were general partners. Things that we did, my husband, despite being a professional hockey player, was actually going to go into engineering. He has a physics degree. He is a very analytical type mindset. And because of that, he's very good at analyzing deals, understanding bank financing terms, writing pro formas, doing all of those, you know, granular type activities. So he's really good at deep diving on the deals. He helped with the underwriting on the properties that we have. And I am really good at operating from afar. I think doesn't come as a surprise with the foundation of being a global director of vaccines, then creating a flipping business while living in Europe, and then now owning properties out of state. So we have 450 doors currently. Right before the COVID-19 stay-at-home order, we had 1 property under LOI, which was about 150 plus units, and then we have another one that we're investing in final, which I'm pretty sure we're also getting that one, that's over 300 units. So those 2 properties we purchased under Ace High Partners. The other deals which Ace High Partners is a new company that we've built to purchase our own properties. The other ones we partnered with other people on the general partnership side, and that's under Bar Down. So Bar Down, we help people with whatever aspect they need at getting a deal done. Most of the time it's operations, because I'm really good at asset and construction management. Not a lot of people in multifamily syndication have someone on their team who who has a construction knowledge and understands asset management, to the level that I do in the integration between asset and construction managers. So we get asked to consult on a lot of properties and also partner with people.
Okay, cool. Right on. No, where are you guys buying these properties at, and how are you finding the markets to purchase in?
So the one property we have is in Ohio. The two other properties we have currently are in Texas. The two that we hope to purchase after COVID-19 are also in Texas. We did a market analysis, and we do one every 6 months to identify what properties are what areas are the most advantageous to go into, make sure that the one that we're in is still a healthy market. Obviously, we check more frequently than that, but the deep dive is every 6 months. And we've identified a short list of 5 markets that we are interested in currently.
Okay. No, what part of Texas are they in? Are they in like the regular old Dallas or Austin areas?
So the one property that we have today is in Houston, MSA. The other one is in Amarillo. And the two that I'm talking about after COVID-19, those are also in Houston.
Okay. So, and some of the obviously market details it's easy to find what other people look at when identifying a market. It's probably population growth, job diversity, job growth, unemployment rate, that type of thing. Is that what you guys are looking for?
We do look at standard metrics like that, but also I created a metric which looks at recession resistance. And the way I determine that is looking at a few different factors, one of which is unemployment rate during the prior to the last recession, during the last recession, and the rate at which it stabilized back to the pre-2008 recession. I think that looking at those unemployment rate drops tells you one part of the story, but the other part tells you how long it took to rebound. And then looking at what economic drivers are in that market today, because judging a market based off of 2008 is not understanding that there are a lot of industries that moved into that market afterwards, and that creates job diversity. So for example, we do not invest in markets where one of the top market drivers is tourism. And that is because my personal belief is that during a recession, the first thing to get cut is tourism. So all of the markets that we are invested in, tourism is not an economic driver or a huge impact within that market.
Okay, understand. Yeah, no, that's good to know. So, and a lot of times you can't take into account 2008 either, because in 2008 was such a huge abnormality, something that happened in the finance, especially that directly related to real estate. I don't think that no matter even this COVID-19, I don't think it's going to take the same effect that 2008 had. You know what I mean? It might have an overall economic impact, but not directly at housing in particular. So
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the reason I look at 2008 is more so because that was a direct impact on real estate, and that's like a worst case scenario that is within our periphery. I think that, there's previous recessions that you can also draw data from, but the 2008 recession directly hit real estate, specifically single family residential type housing. And that's because there's a huge bubble there. Right now, I don't see the bubble within the residential real estate market as much as I see it within the commercial side. So I think the commercial side might be hit a little bit greater. And to your point on, 2008 being an abnormality, I agree. I also think this is an abnormality. I think what we're going to see here is higher unemployment rate, but a faster rebound. The reason which I believe this to be true is because we are being encouraged by our legislation to apply for unemployment right now. There are a lot of policies that they're putting in place to help people get through this period, but you need to go on unemployment. So they're actually encouraging people to apply for unemployment, which I think is going to spike unemployment to levels that we haven't seen in the past. But I think that is not indicative of the overall market like it was in 2008. So I think it's a little misleading if we only look at that metric. That's my personal belief, but other people may differ with that.
Well, let's dive into that. So that's kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about was we had talked about what your thoughts are on like disease progression and all that stuff because of your background. So what do you think the economic outlook is, like how it's affecting your business, how you guys are planning for what's coming, and what do you think is going to come in the next 6, 8, 12 months?
I hate to say this because I know this is probably the question that the people, everyone wants to hear someone's answer to, and they want directive. But the problem is that the policies keep changing every single day, and it's really hard to keep up with what is going to happen because it doesn't seem like anything is set in stone. So for example, the stay-at-home order was initially thought that it would be at a national level, and then it was retracted and said that it was left up to the states to determine. And the states have definitely, majority of the states have taken that order. However, now it's coming back to whether or not that needs to move to a national order versus a retraction and letting people, Trump was saying the other day, I believe it was yesterday, that they may call off the order across the country. So it really is changing day by day, and it's really hard for me to understand what impact it's going to have. I have a general idea of what I think the impact will be based on a certain course, but when you constantly change the course, that creates so much confusion, and I think that in and of itself could cause an outcome that people aren't even considering because we keep changing the directive that we're going to. Ideally, I would like to, I hopefully would like if we, and I think everyone would agree, that we see this huge spike of unemployment for a very short period of time. The market rebounds quickly, because I don't think people will think that this has anything to do with market indicators. I think they think this is kind of an X factor. So businesses will just hurry up and hire everyone again because they think that people will spend like they used to, and our GDP will go back to where it was. I think there are some definite long-term effects that we're going to see to the GDP, and our overall stock market, which has an impact as well. But ultimately, it's so hard to say. And I think when you ask people who are much smarter than I am on this, what their answer today is different what their answer will be tomorrow, because too many things are moving faster than we can process the information.
Yeah, that's totally true. I kind of understand what you're saying because, like you see the stock market was crashing. And then yesterday it spiked up more than it had since 1933 because they are close to a deal. So yeah, who knows what it's going to be. I kind of, I don't hope that everybody loses their jobs and we go into a recession, but I do hope there's kind of a correction in maybe residential, prices across countries. Most places are, maybe overpriced, especially certain areas. So yeah, it's hard to tell. Who knows what's going to happen. So that was a good assessment on your part. So back to our last couple set of questions that I kind of like to get to. What's your favorite resource for learning about real estate? Because you obviously are in several different things. You kind of jumped into this not knowing about real estate. So is it like books, seminars, podcasts, forums? What's your kind of go-to way to learn?
Books and podcasts, and then also just talking with people. I spent several years after 2008 just asking very successful real estate investors what they wish they could have done differently. So I like learning from other people too. I like learning different perspectives. I read things. A lot of people only read what the most recognized person in real estate is saying, but sometimes the newbie investor has more insight than a seasoned one. So I think just being open to getting your information from any source possible it has been extremely impactful on my success and just my overall path.
Okay, awesome. What about a favorite app or technology that you use because you manage deals from afar or something like that? So it could be Instagram or it could be something like a Google Docs or anything like that. What's a piece of technology that makes life easier?
I use Google for everything, so I have to say that by default, but there is an app that I use every single day for years. It's called, I think it's called Scanner Pro.
Oh, no.
I actually probably don't even know the name. It maybe is, hopefully it's called Scanner Pro. I'm advertising them correctly, but
Yeah.
I got the app when it first came out, so it was free for me. I think now they charge like $3.99 or something like that, but that allowed me any single place that I was, whether it was at my husband's game or in Canada visiting their family or anywhere. If I get a document that needs electronic signature, I can do it on there as opposed to, DocuSign. And then also too, I can scan any document in with my phone. So if I have a document in front of me that I need to scan, even to this day, I had to send my tax documents over to my accountant. I just took a picture with my phone, uploaded it into Scanner Pro, and then just emailed it from there. It's so easy. It stores all your documents. I can't say enough about this app, and it's worth every penny. They should be charging like $100 for the app at least.
Yeah, that's a good tip, because I have another one that's called Genius Scan. It's kind of the same thing, but you can do all that same stuff. And I remember when I first got it, before that, I would have to like figure out how I was going to fax these documents, all the time. And I'm like, I don't have a fax machine. So it was
No
always a
one
pain in
does.
the ass. You know what I mean? And so I was like, luckily my mom was in escrow. And so I'd be like, okay, Mom, I got to like come to the office and I got to scan these documents, or I'd have to go to work and do it. And I got this app and I was like, this is amazing. It's so
I
cool.
know.
These smartphones, I can just, I've like done a whole, like, I think I did like a 60-page contract one time, all off my phone, one page at a time.
Yep.
But it was in my living room and I just did it over and over, and it was worked perfectly fine. So
Yeah, it's amazing.
yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Well, Ashley, ton of great information. Where can people find out more about you or contact you or anything like that?
Yeah, so all of my companies, you can all launch off of them from badashinvestor.com. So that's BADASH investor, INVESTOR.com.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for all that information. I really enjoyed the talk about the pharmaceutical stuff. I wasn't expecting that at all. So that was awesome. And
No
everybody,
problem.
reach out to Ashley, check out what she's doing. And thanks again. Thanks for being here. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Thanks again.